I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us on this little lunch hour program we have today. My name is Faye Matt. I'm the Senior Manager of Culture and Inclusion here at Hockey Saskatchewan. And it is my honor and privilege to continue with our webinar series themed around our values. And today, the value that we are examining is that of passion. And it's kind of an interesting take we have on it because when we talk about passion for the game of hockey, it might not come to mind to talk about things we can do other than hockey. But I know that our expert today will help us understand a really good way forward to harness the passion that our young players especially might have for the game and ways to round them out as overall athletes. So before I get too deep into the topic, I wanted to note that today we're learning together with attendees joining us from across the province whose hockey experiences take place in lands covered by Treaties 2, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 10. These are the traditional lands of the Cree, Dakota, Dene, Lakota, Nakota, and Saulteaux people, as well as the homeland of the Métis. And Hockey Saskatchewan recognizes our role in truth and reconciliation, and there's a lot of work to be done towards making hockey even more inclusive. And so we hope to continue to honor that in every learning opportunity that we have together. I also want to mention that our webinar series are brought to you in partnership with Sask Lotteries, particularly the Spark Ideas grant, which was created to help increase the ability of amateur sports system to achieve meaningful, lasting change with member-led initiatives. So for us, that has meant a number of educational series such as this that we can participate in live and also reflect back on through recorded sessions. With me today in the panel that we'll have near the end of this conversation is some of my colleagues, Matt Miller, who leads our grassroots programming, and Joel Hausman, who leads our high performance program. Without further ado, I'd like to bring in our special guest. Today we have Mark McGuire, who is the Executive Director of Give and Go Sport Education. And when I came across what Give and Go Sport Education is as an agency, as an organization, I was so thrilled to think that we could have a conversation, a partnership, a way forward in looking at how young athletes are grown in their sport and sport participation. So Mark brings to us, experience in professional leadership and experience in operating youth programming. And I'm excited to hear what he has to share with us today. So for now, I'll hand it over to you, Mark. Just for a housekeeping note, we'll have questions and hopefully a valuable discussion with all of you at the end of this conversation. But for now, we will let Mark lead us.
Thank you very much, Faye, and welcome to everyone. I'm very pleased to be here this afternoon and have this conversation with you. It's obviously something that's very important. And I like the choice of words there, Faye, passion, right? It is something I think is inherent in many of us as Canadians. I want to talk a little bit about certainly give and go sport education, but just in terms of my relevance to this conversation today, I was a hockey player. I was a professional hockey player and coach in Europe. I spent 5 years there. In both Germany and in France. And when I returned home, I was asked by Hockey Canada to become what's called a specialty skills instructor. So not certain whether that term is around still or not. And I then became a learning facilitator in the province of Ontario. I became what was then called a course conductor. So I don't know if those terms are still relevant or not, but I'm certainly happy to talk about hockey with parents, with coaches, with volunteers, with all stakeholders, because it's something that, as is shown here, we all have a passion for. So Give and Go Sport Education is a not-for-profit organization. We've been around for a few years now, and what we do is we advocate for the physical, mental, and emotional health of children in sport. We don't even call them athletes because they're first and foremost children. And we do that by promoting a seasonal multi-sport participation model. So let's break that down. Seasonal meaning that just like school, just like our jobs, there should ideally be a start and a stop time to every single season. This 24/7, 12-month, all-in hockey all the time is actually detrimental to the child. And then a multi-sport, so where practical, affordable, convenient for the family and the dynamics within the family, we would like to see participation in 2 or more sports. Now, those sports do not have to be structured. They can be unstructured. It can be team or individual, indoor or outdoor, and really it's just general recreational activity. It does not have to be structured sport. And we've come to learn that there are a number of different advantages that are inherent with the multi-sport model and a number of different challenges and problems that sort of come with specialization, in particular early specialization. A little bit of background on the documentary. We created a documentary last fall. The documentary was launched last fall. It took us about a year and a half to make, so we have a number of different participants, let's call them, or talents in the documentary. There are professional athletes, there are Olympic athletes, national sporting organizations. There's an orthopedic surgeon who has operated on a number of athletes. There are people from the education, the healthcare sector, organizations like Participation, the Canadian Tire Jumpstart people are in it. So we have this groundswell of support from different organizations in Canada that are like-minded. In other words, they share our vision and they share the importance of this movement, this message of sort of placing the general health and well-being of the child first in any sport. So they call that kid-centric sport. So the documentary really is intended to be a tool. It's intended to be an aid, a resource for primarily 4 different groups. So the first group is moms between the ages of 25 and 45. We've come to learn that they are, for the most part, the decision makers or the decision influencers on where their children play sport. The second group then would be on sport volunteers, which I'm assuming many of you are. So they are coaches, they are referees, they are judges, they are umpires, they are timekeepers, whatever the sport calls for. We've also come to learn that for the most part, they are the spouse or the significant other of the first group. So mom signs the little one up for sport, and dad or significant other takes them to and then participates in the same sport. The third group then is educators. So educators, in most cases, are teachers at the front of a classroom, but they can also be anyone involved in community sport. So Regina or Moose Jaw, municipal pools, people that work at YMCAs, they're in education. People that work at health and fitness clubs, they are educators as well. And the last group then is grandparents, because surprisingly or not, grandparents have become the Uber drivers of where the children play sport. So there's a lot of conversation that takes place in the vehicle to the venue and from the venue. So that's really the 4 groups that the documentary is intended for. It's about 34 minutes. It's available for rent and or for purchase on just about any device that you have. So that's kind of the opening commentary. We'll talk now a little bit about sort of some what I like to call anecdotal research. We know, for example, from our friends at the Respect Group, which are a neighboring province in Alberta. So that's the unfortunate story of Sheldon Kennedy. Multi-sport athletes are abused less because when they participate in one sport only, let's call it specialization, they believe that all the behaviors, the norms, the vocabulary, the inferences are okay. If, however, they participate in a number of different sports, then the child compares between, okay, this is acceptable, this is acceptable, this is acceptable. Oh, wait a minute. I'm being spoken to here, or they're referring to a particular body part here in this conversation with this sport. So they have the ability to compare and say, well, there's something wrong here. It's the sport. It isn't me, it's the sport. So oftentimes they stand up and they call that behavior out. So it's much healthier for children to participate in a variety of different sports because they can have that comparison model. They feel comfortable in saying something if it isn't. We also know, for example, that multi-sport athletes are injured less. They have what I call the ABCs of sports, so the agility, balance, and coordination. They know how to fall and tumble and roll. They know how to protect themselves. They have critical thinking skills and decision-making skills. For example, let's think about going into the boards in the game of hockey and you're trying to retrieve the puck. They know how to go in at what speed, at what angle. They know what their options are when they're coming out with the puck, or perhaps not with the puck if the goal is to take the player first. So we know that they're less injured, and we know that when they are injured, they recover more quickly because they are, again, that stronger, sort of more prepared, stronger core athlete. So there's a number of different anecdotal research available that's out there that I like to reference. I don't want to get into the scientific or the actual evidence-based research, but just hearing from other stakeholders and people who are in the game, that happens to be the case. So I also want to speak about the responsibility that I felt that we had. A little bit of personal information. I'm the father of 5 children. I'm a grandfather now, and all of them played a variety of seasonal sports. None of them really specialized in any particular sport. And here they are now in their 20s and 30s, and they're all doing reasonably well. They have a tremendous group of friends. They're all socially engaged, and they're all continuing in their sport of choice. And I think that's important as well, is that we learn that when athletes specialize, again, particularly early specialization, meaning before the age of 9, that they tend to be more insular. They tend to grow up sort of in a silo, and they may not have that network of friends. They may not have that social skills. And we also know, for example, let's use the sport of hockey, for example. If you're only playing hockey and you're going to clinics and you're going to off-ice training and all kinds of academies and private lessons and tutoring, as they get into the teen years, then those become front and center as opposed to part-time jobs. And if you don't have part-time jobs, you get to about the age of 19 or 20, and perhaps, let's say if you made it to the CHL, and perhaps you did get drafted, but you didn't make it, then you're 19 or 20 years of age, and you suffer from what people call an identity crisis. You're not quite certain where you fit in, because you've only done one thing for the majority of your life. And the expectation was you're going to go to the next level, that elite level. And perhaps you don't reach that level. So there's a lot of struggling, questioning. It's damaging to the athlete's psyche. So anyway, that's just a couple of observations there in terms of why I felt I was responsible to gather like-minded people around me to help to distribute this messaging of that mental, physical, and emotional health is imperative for the general health of children in sport. So let's see what the next slide brings for us, Faye. Yeah, so I would just like to talk briefly about the total acceptance, the total support, and the responsiveness of all the people that we went to. You'll, if you've not seen the documentary, if you have a chance to see it, you'll see there's Eric Lindros that's in the documentary. We have the Canadian gold medalist decathlete Damian Warner who's in the documentary. We have a number of very senior officials in sport in the documentary. They all, to a person, agreed, Mark, this is needed. How can we help you? How can we help to get the messaging out for, again, those 4 groups? Moms, sport volunteers, educators, and grandparents, because the way that it's currently going, don't want to be pointing fingers at any particular NSO or any particular group, but there's a better way, and we're going to try and be that vehicle to help those 4 groups get to that better way. We know we had to have the documentary when the short sort of window, because everyone is so comfortable with the rapid information that comes at us on our handheld devices. So it couldn't be a 2-hour. And people say, well, Mark, if it's too short, like 12 or 13 minutes, they won't see any value in it. So we've agreed upon this period of 34 minutes, seemed to be about the right amount of time. It's very engaging. It's very professionally done. We've heard that it's Netflix quality. I'll let you be the judge of that if you have an opportunity to watch it. And so just a wonderful experience. I was so pleased that so many Canadians come to the fore on this one and volunteered around us to help us, because it's very expensive to make a documentary. I had no idea that there was that many zeros at the end of the contract. But now that it's in and up and published, I'm extremely proud of the work that we've done. And I also want to take a break here and congratulate Faye and Hockey Saskatchewan on this. Of all the other NSOs, Faye's group is the first one from the hockey world that reached out and connected and say, Mark, we like the messaging. Can you please help us to get this messaging across to our members and our users? So hats off to you, Faye and Hockey Saskatchewan, for being the first in the hockey world to come to the well on this one. Okay, let's see what the next one talks about, Faye. Excuse me, let's take a look at this trailer here. Maybe this would be a good intro for those in the meeting this afternoon. It's about 1.5 minutes, and I think it'll speak for itself. Thank you.
If you're an athlete, you're an athlete. Athletes play sports. They're not people that just play one individual sport.
You can actually learn a skill much better if you've done a bunch of different things.
Sport specialization, this idea, the earlier we can get them started and hone in on one sport, that's going to help them excel and be that next all-star athlete.
It leads to a lot of serious injuries at a young age.
They're just operating on these young kids nonstop, and 0% go on to play professional.
To be really successful in a sport, you have to put in the hours, but also knowing when it's time to rest.
You want your brain at 100%. And by not giving yourself that chance, you're at a deficit to start the next season.
There's more to the game than just showing up and picking up a racket or kicking a ball, shooting a basketball. There's a whole mental component of the game that's hardly talked about.
Sport specialization is associated with more stress, burnout, and dropout from sport.
Kids see the flashy cars, all the money. What they're also hearing is that if they commit and give their all to this now, then that's what they receive.
That's where societal pressure shifted. The ones that tend to be the most successful actually did participate in multiple different sports. The time is now.
The education and awareness needs to be from top down.
You need to be an advocate for your child.
If we can change one coach's behavior, then we affect many children.
And you're not going to learn that from a textbook. You have to feel it, live it, and be part of it.
The multi-sport movement is growing.
Multi-sport is the way to go.
Sports has been the most important thing in my life, and I couldn't imagine my life without it.
Okay, so we had a question earlier. NSO is a national sporting organization. There are 66 of them in Canada. And yeah, so I made reference to an acronym earlier, so that's what NSO stands for. So let's just break this down. What is sports specialization? So the classic definition is it's focusing on a single sport, often at the exclusion of others, for a significant portion of the year. And there are a couple of sports, figure skating comes to mind, as does gymnastics, perhaps swimming, where it actually is in the child's best interest to start at a very young age. And that young age could be about the time they start school. So specialization in those cases, it does make sense. So think of a gymnast starting at age 15 or 16, right? That'd be rather tough to do. So there's about let's be generous, there's about 5 NSOs that strongly encourage early specialization, and that's fine. But what about the other 61 NSOs? We have hockey players, baseball players, soccer players, and this isn't pointing fingers because we're all in this, that are specializing at age 8 or 9. There is an organization here in Ontario, and I won't mention it, and it's unfortunate, but there are AAA hockey players, age Pee-wee, they played 108 hockey games last season at Pee-wee. To me, that's concerning. There we have children who are missing schools days on Fridays and Mondays because of tournaments, and not, well, you see where I'm going, so I don't want to come across too strong on that one. So this intense focus normally occurs before they reach adolescence, and it can occur even prior. So the danger with that is that when the body is not fully developed, muscularly skeletal development, and they're focusing on one skill only, that sets the athlete up for some injuries with significant implications, particular arthritis, as they age, because there's the overdevelopment of certain muscle groups, which it just doesn't play out well as they age. And of course, on top of not just that sport, but there's all the activity that's sort of before and after that sport. So there's the clinics, the lessons, the schools, the 3-on-3 tournaments. I suppose it's like the old acronym of not acronym, but the adage of when production exceeds capacity, performance is compromised. We can only get so much out of these children. There is a threshold, there is a tolerance that we have to be aware of, and if they're getting closer to that, we just not continue to push it. We need to back down and back off a little bit. Again, placing the interests of the child first. Okay, what's our next one look like, Faye? So here's some challenges. I don't want to call them problems, but I would say they certainly are challenges, but there's opportunity for us to address them. There is an increased risk in overuse of injuries and concussions. It does delay the overall motor development of the child. There is this pressure to perform and win versus participate and grow. Single sport athletes do retire early because, quite honestly, they've had it. They've had enough of that. There's this mental fatigue that sets in. And sometimes, many times they tend to hang with the same groups. They don't have the social skills. They don't have the requisite skills for meeting others, introducing themselves, forming solid, healthy bond relationships with other people. They're sort of caught in, well, this is let's use hockey as an example. This is the hockey sort of social, and we all hang together. So there's some challenges with that, mentally, physically, emotionally, and socially as well. Okay, what's our next one look like, Faye? So let's talk about seasonal multi-sport. So as I mentioned at the top of the meeting, it's a start and an end period. It should not be longer than 8 months. So that gives us a lot of time. Or in a case of hockey, if it were to start in September, we should be done, give or take, around April. I don't know how realistic that is for many of the audience today, but that's the goal that we're aiming for. It doesn't have to be registered, doesn't have to be structured, and it doesn't have to be belonging to a team or an association. I'm thinking of a general recreational activity here. So where possible, 2 or more sports. And we had an organization there called Parachute. You may or may not know of them. They're from Toronto, and they deal with brain injuries among young athletes. And they talk about this need for time off, and they're suggesting that children should not play sports all 4 seasons. They should play at maximum 3 of the seasons. So any particular 3, they don't have to be in order, but they're suggesting that 12-month-a-year sport itself is a little bit on the edge. They're suggesting we back that down to, in this case, 9 of 12 months. Okay, what's our next one suggest? So here are some advantages. I may have referenced some of them earlier, but I just want to talk about a couple here. We know that it does build the A, Bs, and Cs. Many of the coaches in the groups today are familiar with the agility, balance, and coordination skills. It does help us as well with our read and react skills. So think of a hockey player, a defenseman who needs to break out of his or her zone. The read and react, he's got the ice in front of him. Does he carry it out? Does he pass it out? Does he not go out right now? Does he cycle back down behind the goal line? So those are all known as read and react skills. So it's a little bit of an opportunity to sort of assess the situation and do an analysis, and what's the next best thing to do given that situation. And also I like this reference here. This comes from a colleague of mine who's in the documentary, a former catcher for the Detroit Tigers and now an analyst on Sportsnet. His name is Joe Siddle. He calls it figure it out skills. If we're constantly receiving instruction from these coaches on what to do and how to do it, in a way, we're sort of telling the child you don't have to think, we'll do the thinking for you. And what he's suggesting is playing multi-sports gives children the opportunity to be introduced to different uncertain situations, not dangerous, but uncertain situations where they have to figure things out. And wouldn't every parent or teacher want children to be thinking things out, being more independent thinkers as opposed to sort of being followers all the time? And we do know that multi-sport athletes also do recover more quickly, and it's a fuller, more full recovery when it does take place. So this is a model that I was introduced to decades ago when I lived in Europe. It's called the sports club model. There may or may not be these clubs available in Saskatchewan. I can't speak with experience on that. There are a couple of them in Ontario I certainly know of. And it's where a professional team has a number of different sports within their club. So FC Bayern Munich is the one that I'm familiar with because that's where I lived. So they would have hockey, they would have basketball, they would have handball, which is really big in Europe, and I think they had volleyball. So the cool piece about that is that it doesn't really matter where you live, but each sport has different coaches. And also the cool thing about that is that each sport is seasonal. In fact, it's mandatory. They don't allow you to play, let's say 8 or 10 months in one sport. And you have to be a minimum of age of 8 to join. And as I mentioned earlier, specialization is not allowed. So I think we're going to see, and perhaps some of you can speak with relevance to this in your community, that this model seems to be growing. I can't see anything inherently bad in it. I'm just concerned that we'll have a number of these pockets of sport clubs popping up and running indirect competition with amateur hockey associations, and then forcing the parent or the guardian to make a decision on what's the best model here, where we have these legacy organizations like Hockey Saskatchewan, which is a very strong brand and is well respected, and you have a good model up and running. I just don't want parents to be thinking it's an all or nothing. I'm a fan of this seasonal multi-sport, but I don't want them to sort of pull the plug on what they're already doing. If there's such a thing as finding a happy medium, then I'd be in favor of something like that. I'm not suggesting this model works for everybody. I'm just saying that this model exists elsewhere in the world, and it's something we should be aware of. So let's talk about this development component, skills development, and hopefully have a little bit more success with this video.
The most important thing about sports is just like moving your body and experiencing a whole bunch of different things. And I think anytime that you have a chance to play hockey or soccer or basketball or the decathlon, it's always a cool opportunity to challenge yourself in different ways. And from my experience, you just learn so much from sports. And I think that's why playing multiple sports is the most important thing. If you're an athlete, you're an athlete. Athletes play sports. They're not people that just play one individual sport. And me and my coach had this philosophy that the best athlete is going to win the Olympic gold medal. Not the best decathlete or not the person that's the most trained, but the best athlete.
There's really no bad form of physical activity. Really anything that gets you up and moving is a win in our book. The more you're able to participate in different activities, it's just going to allow you to kind of get exposure to a number of different things and find something that really resonates with you.
I see absolutely no downside in getting involved in as many aspects of sport as you possibly can.
The gift of getting into many sports is that it gives you many skills across a lifetime that you might not get from one sport.
All of the ancillary things that come from a multi-sport experience are really where the character is developed and the life lessons are learned.
We identify kids who are great at a sport and we think, okay, the best thing to do now is keep them on this path and help them develop as the best little hockey player or soccer player that we can. But that's actually counterproductive. We want those kids to be challenged on the field of play. We want them to develop different physical skills, but also to be challenged mentally in a positive way so that they flourish and develop and thrive over time. So that multi-sport experience is critical, especially at a young age, to really make sure that we're deriving all of the benefits around sport and physical activity.
We tend to focus on an athlete developing the physical skills and the sport-specific skills for them to excel. That's great. And I think that's always going to be a big part within sport. But when you are participating in multi-sport, your ability to really develop the mental, emotional skills, the ability to develop your social skills, those are all key components of how we want our athletes to be able to develop so that they become better people overall.
When you're always with the same people and always doing the same things, you have less awareness of maybe what's right and what's wrong. When you're only in one environment all of the time, you just assume that what your experience is the way things are supposed to be.
Going through the school system, we have different school teachers, we're in different classrooms, our friends don't follow us everywhere, we've got to make new friends. That's a very holistic opportunity to figure out who you are, how you want to behave. And I look at sport the same way. If you only have one coach all your life and you only play one sport, you're really limiting some of the great and wonderful things that can come about.
Think of it as an adult who's progressed throughout their career and they've had 3 or 4 different career paths that they've followed. They're able to go back and say, wow, the lesson I learned in this role, I'm going to apply that to a challenging situation I'm currently having today. It's the same ideology when you apply it to sport for children at an early age. The more diversity of experiences they have, the more they can connect the dots in real time in a new situation to take new challenges head on.
If you stay focused in one sport, then you're naturally drawn toward this notion of win-loss and self-defining yourself by win-loss versus did you have fun out there? What did you experience in this sport today? How's that coach working with you? Did you meet new friends across many sports? It's opening the world to the child in a way that we really need to give all of our kids.
So we're going to talk about injuries now, because I think that's important. Injuries are inherent in sport, some minor, some major, some career-ending. So some information that comes to us from this is Dr. Robert Litchfield, who is an orthopedic surgeon at the Fowler Kennedy Clinic at the University Hospital at Western University in London, Ontario. And his claim to fame is that he operates on the most expensive knees and hips in professional sports. So all of the major athletes in North American sport anyway, many of them have been on his table with him with a scalpel in his hand. Anyway, he speaks about single sport athletes having a 50 to 70% increase in injuries than seasonal or multi-sport, single sport having a 50 to 70% increase. He also talks about it specifically being dangerous for prepubescent athletes. And he gives a couple of examples. So he cites the single sport volleyball or baseball. It's that pitching, that constant use, the turning of the joint. Basketball includes shoulder and hip, elbow and knee and ankle. Hockey includes hip and knee. And I'll just speak briefly about the hockey injuries, which I think is relevant for those in attendance today. So if you think about a defenseman who is seat cutting, right? He's skating backwards, he's seat cutting, and then he has to go open to a stride glide recovery. So he's opening up that hip. And it's the constant opening of that hip. It doesn't matter if he's going right or if he's going left. It's the constant opening of that hip. At a very young age, that's not an issue when he or she is midget or older because they have the strength in that joint. But it's the constant opening of that hip that does relate to hip injuries, hip surgeries, and arthritis as the hockey player ages. So there's nothing wrong with the C-cut. There's nothing wrong with the opening of the hip. The point is that there needs to be other sports around that will build that joint, that'll build the muscles above the core and the muscles just below the core that'll help to support that hip when the hip is being opened. He also speaks about, he says 0% of single sport athletes that have had Tommy John surgery. So that's the operation. I don't know the technical term, folks, but it's the operation. I believe it's between the elbow and the wrist of the throwing arm. It's that repetitive use, in particular, if it's prepubescent, if there's any type of English or spice, I call it, which is a curve, a knuckle, a slider. It's not a natural movement for the athlete of that age. So we have to be careful with that in the world of baseball. And he says that injuries that require surgery at that young age, they are permanent. That joint will never return or come back to the joint is originally intended to be. And that's all comes under the category of reducing the injuries as a result of multi-sports. Okay. What's our next one look like, Faye? So this is a big part here, and Frank, who is in the documentary, he's a former member of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, played in the CFL for a number of years. He talks about this. They see the performance of the athlete, but they don't see the personal struggles of the athlete. And as a result, we're starting to see, and I'm certain this is a global issue, that young people are harming themselves at an alarming rate. And a lot of it has to do with this expectation. So when single sport is present in the family, the whole family goes, the siblings go, there's weekends, there's tournaments, there's playoffs, there's a lot of activity. And children, most of them understand the value of a dollar, so they know how much is being spent. And they know the time commitments, in particular if mom and dad are taking a day or two off of work. And then, as I mentioned, if you get to that, WHL level or the CHL level, and perhaps they make it, great. Perhaps they don't make it, then there's this sort of this burden that the child has and experiences as a result of, well, we had this all set up, we were going to go, and now we're not, and perhaps I'm the reason for not going. So some of those symptoms include sudden change in friendships, wanting to be left alone. So wanting that dark time, the quiet time, secluded time in the child's room, change in dietary habits, declining in school grades, or perhaps not wanting to go to school. Or it could be the aggressive, agitated, and argumentative behaviors that children are experiencing. And we certainly know that among our colleagues at work, or if you're a student, and this is happening more and more now at younger ages, which is becoming, as Frank says here, it's an alarming thing for all of us. Okay, what's our next one suggest? So let's take a look at this transferable skills video.
Can actually learn a skill much better if you've done a bunch of different things. How to jump, how to throw, how to skip, how to slide. I think these are all valuable things that relate to tennis and that can be learned and developed while playing different sports such as soccer, gymnastics, hockey.
Footwork is a very fundamental skill within soccer. You use that to control a soccer ball, but you don't really kick the ball in basketball. But footwork is critical within the game of basketball. You learn that from soccer. It is 100% transferable into the sport of basketball.
If you're a young hockey player, think of the cardiovascular benefits that you could gain by being a soccer player in the summertime. Think about the eye-hand benefits that you could gain by being a baseball player.
The skills that you use on the football field as a quarterback help you as a catcher behind the plate in baseball, and they can help you as a forward in basketball on the basketball court.
I swam a lot, which I think gives you a strong base. It wasn't a competitive swimming thing, it was just swimming and being in the water all the time. And you get to soccer, you're getting a huge cardio base, constantly working as a team. Baseball, hand-eye. So when you relate to deflections or face-offs or chipping the puck out of the neutral zone, things like that, that's very much the same as bunting and any kind of contact with a bat.
Now doing the decathlon where there's so many different aspects, you have running, jumping, throwing, and all the events are so different, I'm able to draw on experiences that I had playing baseball as a kid or hockey or basketball. I don't think I'd be where I am as a decathlete if I didn't have the experiences that I did when I was growing up.
Multi-sport or sports sampling, it's going to allow you to develop a really vast array of fundamental movement skills, which are really those building blocks for physical literacy.
The agility, the balance, the coordination, those are all key components of every athlete. So that's what we're really looking for.
We want tennis players, but also athletes. So that's the base of everything. And it's quite obvious the ones that when they do it well, that means that they most likely done different sports. And that for us is really important.
Thank you, Faye. I just want to digress for a second here to speak about my experience with Eric Lindros. I was introduced to him by the former director of health sciences there, Dr. Jim Weiss, who was a former opponent of mine in junior hockey in the 70s. Anyway, Eric Lindros comes into the room, and if you've ever had an opportunity to meet him before, and if not, he's just a monster of a man. He's about 6'5", and his hands look like just big rakes. and you can tell he's a hockey player without a mask, because there's a lot of thread that's been in and out of there. But he really has a passion for this. His own children, I believe, I don't want to name the name of the school, but I believe his own children are in this sort of seasonal, it's only allowed, you can only play soccer for so long. You can only play, I think, lacrosse for so long. You can only play hockey for so long. So I find that very interesting that here's a Hall of Famer, a legend, a World Junior champion, a Mem Cup champion, to be speaking about let's pull it down on hockey. There's too much hockey, and I find that interesting from him. It's just that he has some relevance to the sport. So of course that's music to my ears from the documentary. But he's a very interesting, and he also, for the size of him, he's a real gentleman. He's just a prince of a guy. I was very impressed by the time that I spent with Eric Lindros. So let's talk here about some statistics. This comes from the NHLPA, that in Canada, 1 of every 1,500 hockey players make it to the National Hockey League. So the people of Hockey Canada confirmed that there's roughly 600,000 players, and there is roughly, give or take, about 600,000, right? So in the NHL is roughly 600 players. Half of that are Canadian, and if you do the math backwards, it's about 1 hockey player in the NHL for every 1,500 hockey players in Canada. Then once they make it to that level, the average is 2.4 years. So you have the Ovechkins, the Patrick Kanes, the Sidney Crosby, who are career hockey players at maybe 15, 18, 20 years in the league. That means that there's a number of different hockey players who have played 1 game or 2 games. If the average is 2.4 years, we have to really think here, parents and coaches and sport administrators, we need to really set this up and create paths for our children, as opposed to the child for a particular path. So a child for a particular path is that by the time you're 10, you will be doing this. By the time you're 14, you will be doing this. Well, and by the time you're 17, you'll be doing that. That you're creating a path. I suspect that the better way to go is let's create, sort of pathways at an earlier age that allows the child to make these decisions for any path that presents themselves in front of the child. There are some exceptions, and we call them outliers. So Tiger Woods, for example. And some of you may remember, at least I do, when he was about age 4, he was on a show called the Merv Griffin Show. Some of you may remember this. And Merv Griffin asked his father, whose name escapes me, it doesn't matter, what's the goal? What's the end game here? And he pointed to his son on the stage. As a 4-year-old, he will become a professional golfer. And sure enough, he did. Unfortunately, his adult life didn't really go too well. He made some personal choices, and it sort of put his life into the ditch for a while. But there's a lot of in and outs of different abuse programs. It's coming out now. And then the case of the Williams sisters, same thing. They are genetically special children, right? They're born that way. They sort of come down the birth canal that way. And oftentimes they're positioned as the sort of go-to model where, not really. Let's just be careful and back that down. That although they did work very hard, they are talented people, and yes, they're very good at who they are and what they've done for sport. No one can argue with what Tiger Woods has done for sport. But I'm suggesting there's other ways of doing it and getting there. And just in terms of cross sports, so Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes were both drafted in Major League Baseball. And Joe Siddle, who is now with the Sportsnet broadcaster for the Blue Jays, went to Central Michigan on a football scholarship, later to become a baseball catcher. So yeah, the quest for pro is there. We just need to position it properly with people in these conversations, that they're extremely rare, as opposed to it's the norm. Okay, let's see what the next one looks like, Faye. So here we talk about the importance of play. And look, the research is clear. Sport cites fun as a #1 motivator to bring children to sport and keep them in sport for longer periods of time. A group from Western Canada, they're called Sport for Life. You may have heard of them. And another group called Active for Life. You may have heard of them. The two Richards, I call them. They talk about all the ing sports. So rolling, jumping, kicking, climbing, falling, starting, stopping, catching, all these, they're called ing sports. The younger a child is exposed to all the ing sports, the better athlete the child will be. And that includes hockey players. When you think about a hockey player being in the ready position, right? And you think about a volleyball player being in the ready position to receive a serve, or think about a basketball game when they're around a free throw, being in the ready position. Think about a football player who's in the ready position at the huddle, at the line of scrimmage, rather. So all that comes from learning the importance of sort of having the center, a lower center of gravity for your body. Position yourself with your hips bent, your knees bent, your ankles bent, your elbows tucked in by your sides, your hands in front of you, your head up and your chin out. That's all known as the ready position. And it all comes from, believe it or not, these ing sports when children are young. So structure, routine, it doesn't really help with the ing sports. The ing sports do better when we invite players to be innovative, to be creative, to think about things differently. Eric told me that Wayne Gretzky was a phenomenal, prolific goal scorer because the majority of the times the goaltender was not expecting the shot. And it's tough to argue with his statistics, but he didn't always shoot in that prime real estate area. He was shooting from close to the goal line, from on the wall, on the half wall, from low, from outside the hash marks, inside. He was shooting from all over. But for the most part, it was because he was thinking differently. He was creative in his shots and caught the goaltender on his or her heels, well, in that case, his heels, and tough to argue those statistics. Okay, so let's shift the narrative from competing, winning, and excelling to vocabulary like participating, contributing, and learning. Okay, what's our next one look like, Faye? Yeah, so let's watch this video, last video or next to last video, about the importance of time off. And I liken this to us as professionals, whatever your profession is. You may be a student, we all need time off. And I'm obviously an advocate for giving the children the time off as well. There's a whole host of different reasons for that. We'll talk about that, but let's watch the video first.
Whether we're talking about sport or physical activity in general, it's a really important time that we revisit how much organized activity we're putting in kids in any given week, and recognizing the need for seasons and time off.
When you're in something like hockey and it's inadvertently, there's always going to be some contact. There's going to be some impact on the brain. If you drive a pickup truck down a country road and you don't stop to have it serviced once a year, sooner or later, everything's going to fall apart. It's not the big bump in hockey, but it's that constant bouncing on the road, the accumulation of those. That is the worry. You want your brain at 100%. And by not giving yourself that chance to rest it and to do something different, you're at a deficit to start the next season. And I don't think you're ever coming back from where you used to be. I endorse multisport. There isn't a whole lot of impact in baseball. Swimming, there isn't a whole lot of impact at all. You're doing something completely different, so you're resting other areas that were asked to really truly perform hard over the last 9 months. You're giving them a chance to rest.
Having a start point to a end point and then a break point. Parents need to understand the importance of rest and recovery for a child's development growth, both physically, mentally, and emotionally as well.
Some of the seasons that we have are so long that it really leaves little time for anything else. An opportunity to participate in a variety of different sports will really round out individuals, and we'll be better off for it, and they will be better off for it.
Look at your work life. It's important that you have a start time and an end time. Same thing with the child. What's the start time for the sports? What's the end time for the sports? And as parents, we're the ones who can help dictate that.
To be really successful in a sport, you have to put in the hours, but also knowing when it's time to rest and to step away from it as well can be really beneficial, especially at development age.
Thank you, Faye. I just want to make reference to some statistics that I was introduced to. We know, for example, that the majority of the penalties occur near the end of a shift, right? Because the body's fatigued, the brain is fatigued, so we don't really have that clarity of thought. So majority of the penalties occur the latter part of a shift. Interestingly, the majority of injuries occur near the latter part of a shift as well. So if we are sort of overloading the minds, the brains of these young hockey players, in this case, not giving them that time off, we get into that capacity challenge again. This, backing down the number of games, and I'm all for practicing. I don't know what happened to the ratio of 3-1, but anyway, that's a whole different meeting. So I just suggest that let's back down a little bit, and I think you will find that both your penalties times will decrease and your injuries time will be reduced, will decrease rather, because we don't have that overloading of thinking. So we'll have less fatigued athletes. Last point here, internal occurring stress for kids is natural. A certain amount of stress, most psychologists, psychiatrists will tell you is healthy, but it's that external, it's the additional, it's expectation. That's not healthy for children in sport. So let's see what our next one talks about here. Okay, so a little bit of some references point here to some coaches. It can become damaging to the physical, emotional, and psychological development of youth. Single sport athletes typically do not stay in sport as volunteers. So I don't know what it's like in Saskatchewan, but certainly in Ontario, we're having difficulty getting volunteers to fill positions for us, not just in sport, but just volunteers in general. And I suspect that hockey is not that dissimilar from other sports. We need volunteers. And I think the organic model is better. Well, we take them from internally, but in part, we're challenged with having volunteers because there's a lot of single sport athletes and they get to maybe the teen years of perhaps college, university, or their first job. No, I've had enough sport. I'm backing out for a while. They come back in later as parents, but there's that perhaps decade where they leave. And that comes at a high cost to us in sport. We want those bodies to stay in sport for longer periods of time. Perhaps someone from Hockey Saskatchewan can speak to that. And I like this final point here that was given to us by Lorraine Lafreniere from the Coaching Association. If we can change one coach's behavior, we can positively affect many children. I liken this example to, some of you may remember, when seatbelts came into play. Volvo, the car manufacturing company, was so concerned with the safety of their drivers that they introduced this thing called the seatbelt. And when I was a teenager, we didn't wear seatbelts, and I don't think when I had to get my license, I had to have a seatbelt on. But think of now, think of all the safety, think of all the reduced injuries, the lives that have been saved as a result of people wearing seatbelts. And I think there's a message here. I find that it's very similar. This messaging of seasonal multi-sport is more like an evolution as opposed to a revolution. So a revolution is overnight, a lot of damage, and a lot of regret. I think the seasonal multi-sport model is better if we take the evolution, where it's done more slowly, more intentional, longer periods of time, low risk, non-threatening. And if we start to plant these seeds now, I think eventually we will get to where the seasonal multi-sport participation model is the de facto standard, as opposed to the all-in, not knocking hockey, because we are all guilty of this. I too have a background in hockey and was a father. But I think we'll all sort of be working collectively for what's the right thing for, in this case, the child or the athlete. So think about the evolution of planting seeds as opposed to the revolution of overnight. Because if we start going around and getting on a soapbox about, pointing fingers and you and you do that, I don't think that'll work well. They're going to shut us down, and we have to be communication. We have to have more communication on this importance of this messaging. So please don't go out there and get a sticker and say, give and go is, all for this and putting these people down. That's not the messaging at all. We want this to come across as more of a group, kinder, softer, gentler message, and I think it'll be more receptive from those that hear it. Okay, so what is next? Well, I would like to tell you that this is the first in a docu-series. The very first documentary is just called Give and Go at Large, because this is our first foray into this space. The next one's going to be called Give and Go Coaches, and the last one's going to be called Give and Go Parents. So there's 2 more documentaries that are coming. There is also going to be e-learning courseware that's coming to you. We're currently working with organizations that do work with Coaching Association of Canada, Sport for Life, and the Respect Group. So some of these groups that put together courseware, so the documentaries will be embedded into courseware, and there'll be e-learning modules. And we're also going to be taking the show on the road. We're going to be hosting workshops, and communities will be able to call themselves Give and Go certified. Yeah, I think this suggests that there's Q&A, but before we get to Q&A, I think it's important. I want to reference the organizations that have become very good friends of ours at Give and Go, and they include all those names that are listed there. These are the organizations that are, for the most part, national in scope, and they all get the bigger picture. And I just want to make reference to them because a lot of the statistics and a lot of talking points come from them. And I don't want to forget them, that's all. So Faye, I'll turn it back to you. And if we have some Q&A, I'll be more than happy to answer them. And if not, I'll see if we can get back to you with some answers.
Well, thank you, Mark. I think that was a wonderful compilation of information for our members and those of us leading hockey. And I appreciate you honoring that, we're not trying, it is interesting for us as hockey to come forward today with a message saying, in some ways, don't play as much hockey or, mix it up a bit. And yet there's a value in being self-critical of our programs, because we inherently value our members and the young people who play hockey first and foremost. And so it's a measure of self-criticism that is only to benefit our members, to not get carried away with, if we're doing great work and our associations are offering great programs, that doesn't mean more is better all the time. So yeah, thank you for that. And we will now move into a bit of a conversation about some of the topics that you brought us and some thought starters. And I did invite, Matt and Joel as well to talk a bit about our experience from Hockey Saskatchewan and some of the things we've seen anecdotally, some of the things we're hearing, and how we build our programs based on some of this notion. So I will ask to sort of each of you, or you can jump in. Mark, you brought us some of the risks that are associated with early specialization. And I'm curious, to Joel and Matt in particular, probably to you, Joel, like what are some of those risks that you're seeing manifesting in our players across the province?
Well, I think the first thing you notice is injuries. Like Mark alluded to, when they get older, sometimes when the kids are younger, obviously the injury thing doesn't happen, but when their bodies start to wear down as they age and get into those later teen years, that's where you can notice if somebody is specialized too early, for sure. I'd say on the flip side, some of the best players we've had are multi-sport athletes, and their athletic ceiling is much higher and they're just not prone to those same types of things. The other thing you notice with the multi-sport athlete in our programs is when they've had a break in the summertime or done something else, play another sport, when they get to the fall again, they're very, very excited to play. Some kids that are a specialization or a one sport, they're not as excited to come back to the rink because they essentially never left. So that's something just I've noticed over my time here.
It can
Yeah,
lose its novelty a
I'm
bit.
happy that you say that, Joel. I'm happy to hear that piece around this excitement, this anticipation, right? Like that's just old-fashioned fire in the belly. Like every coach wants that from a hockey player, that they come with this expectation of, I'm here, I'm ready, drop the puck. And you're right. If it's drop the puck every day, that puck becomes a four-letter word. So I'm happy that you're experiencing that in Hockey Saskatchewan, that there is that appetite, right? When's the season start again? That's what we want in kids.
Yeah, I agree.
So in one of the videos there, Damian Warner, the decathlon, talks about the difference between being an athlete and being, in our case, a player. Those sort of different sets of skills. You might have skills attributed to a particular sport, but what makes an overall athlete? And that makes me think about the different evaluation activities that we do with our organization. So Joel does that with our high performance programming, and Matt has a role in doing that with our minor associations, helping evaluate and assess where players are at. So I'm curious, when you're doing those evaluations, what are some of the differences, or what are some of the things you would look for in evaluations that you could maybe categorize as this person is an athlete or this person is a player? Oh, Matt, we got you on mute there. Just try that from out of the gate again.
Yeah, sorry. I can speak to a little bit of that, I guess, like Mark talking about the eye-hand coordination and transferring of, certain aspects of different sports into hockey. I can always relate to some of the stuff of my own. Being a multi-sport in a small town was something we had to do in order to make sport go in all the sports that we had. So badminton to hockey was my biggest thing. So badminton was the eye-hand coordination. And then transferring that into hockey was always a beneficial for various things of eye-hand coordination wise and stuff like that. Also noticed it a little bit with fitness and endurance, training wise and whatever too was also like that. So I think those are things that can translate into how you evaluate players in hockey, to how athletic you are. Same as goaltenders would be the same way, and I'm sure Joel can speak to some of that also.
Yeah, for sure. You can sure notice, the example in the video there was of a soccer player, doing lots of sprints that directly affects your hockey performance, right? You're building your cardio, you're using some of the same muscles, but you're doing something different. You're outside, you're in a different environment. It just helps you. Multi-sport is the best trainer for hockey, especially at the younger ages, if you want to put it that way. So if you're thinking about, wanting to be a good hockey player, playing other sports and becoming a good athlete, like Damien says, is where it's at, in my opinion.
I liken the example here, Faye, to this term, probably many of you are familiar with. It's called high intensity interval sport, right? So hockey is an anaerobic, high intensity interval sport. So sudden burst of energy, periodic sudden burst of energy, 30 to 45 seconds, maybe even shorter now. But anytime you can replicate that in another sport, I think is good. And to Joel's point, I'm just shooting from the hip here. So we know that happens in football, for example, right? There's a play, there's a stoppage, there's a huddle, there's a scrimmage, there's another play. And rugby comes to mind as well, right? Although there's a lot of activity there. So those two just come to mind. But I think about perhaps in maybe high school basketball or volleyball, when the good coaches, rotate the players frequently. So they're on the court move through the 6 possessions, then they're off the court. So that would mimic that model as well. Anytime you can mimic real sport activities from other sports, it's just complementary, and you're just instilling those same kind of coaches and the thought process, practices rather, and thought processes for the athlete to prepare themselves for, in this case, hockey as well. So, soccer, certainly you get the cardio there. Eric spoke about anything in your hand. So whether it's a racket, a hockey stick, a bat, you have your control hand and you have your power hand, depending on which side, which hand you are. But it's the leveraging of the upper body limbs, and it starts with the core being in the ready position. You get so much. There's so much fruit there from playing other sports that allows you to bring it back to hockey, which makes you better, and you're more likely going to have more fun if you're better at it.
What it brings to mind for me, and I like to kind of tap into the mental side of it as well. And Mark, you talked a lot about the importance of identity in a person and in their sport, and not getting carried away with groupthink that can happen with spending too much time with any particular team, even if it's a great team with good intentions. It makes me think about the opportunities for athletes, for players who have these other interests, to even share that other interest and a bit about themselves with their teammates, and express that there's more to them. They're a multifaceted human. They are a hockey player, yet they are also, in Matt's case, a badminton player, and they have great experiences there. Or they take a dance class on the side. Maybe it's part of their heritage. Like, those things are also, from the social and mental side of things, important for young people as well, to really harness on an identity that is multifaceted in addition to those physical skills.
Yeah, so when you think about a hockey player, let's just isolate the sport of hockey for a minute. We might as well, because it's relevant here for the group. Coaches call that mental toughness. Just the ability to play through adversity, to play through fatigue, to play through opponents who perhaps are dirty, or officials who are missing calls, or poor skating conditions. There's a game last night, by the way, the Red Wings played in Utah, and the ice conditions were terrible because of the conditions there in Utah. And they interviewed the coach, and now he, because of his age, had been exposed to that before, but many of the younger players have not been exposed to playing on less than pristine conditions. So there's a certain element of mental toughness there. You can complain and say the ice is soft, or the lighting is poor, or I don't like the puck boards here versus the puck boards at that end. But that's where it's at. The opponent plays in the same conditions. And I'll bring a reference to this a little bit also with the social aspect, the mental ability to be able to communicate. So a good colleague of mine who helped me out, his name is Bob Duff, and he's a writer for a number of different Canadian dailies. He's a sport journalist. He's covered 4 different Olympics. So he's covered every major sporting event that's come to Detroit, which is neighboring to us here in Windsor. In the last 30 years, he's covered all the major teams, and he's followed the Red Wings all the way through their 4 cups in about 13 years, and he still covers them. And he has conversations now with some of the veterans on the team. So those who have been in the league, let's say 12, 15 years, and they're telling him that some of the new young players that are coming in, now this is the elite level in the case of hockey, the best league in the world, socially, they're challenged. Because all they did, well, some of them, they grew up with this sort of hockey vocabulary, these hockey norms, these hockey practices, these, this is how a hockey player acts, lives, and talks and breathes. Then they get into the dressing room with some of the senior players, and they're sort of uncomfortable. They're not confident in having conversations about things other than hockey. So if the conversation is hockey specific, they're very comfortable. But it's talking about anything else, that they're just not part of the conversation, because they don't have those life experiences, because they didn't have part-time jobs. They didn't live here. They didn't do that. They didn't study this. They don't know what's meant to, for example, you think a few decades ago, European hockey players would come and you'd see them in between the games and the periods, rather, they'd be sort of, dribbling a soccer ball around, right? And playing with it, and it'd be their way of loosening up, limbering up, and also probably getting their mind into the game. And we've also learned too from the people at Canadian Sport for Life, which are the founders of the LTAD model, that the physical literacy of single sport athletes it's a failing grade. They don't possess all those ings that they should have. So it's unfortunate they get to this level, which is great for them at that level if they can stay there. But think of the tens of thousands don't get to that level, but still played only a single sport. And they're not doing well on the physical literacy school report card. So bit of a challenge there for all of us, I would suspect.
It makes me think of a program that we do, led by Matt, each spring called Female Futures. And during that program, not only is it a hockey tournament format, but there's also introduction to other sports. And Matt, I'm curious if you could maybe talk about, some of the ideas behind that, and also like, what do you observe when you have those young girls on the ice, and then when you plunk them into another sport, what are their skills looking like across those two?
Yeah, so we've been doing that for the last 5 years or so. We've just been adding a multi-sport. So whether it's been intro to flag football, an intro to lacrosse, we also done some yoga sessions with the girls, and it's just to give them that little bit of exposure to a different sport, and just keep their it's hockey, but it's still like we want to make sure that they are getting introduced to doing some other things also. So
that's good.
How do they respond when?
Congratulations, Matt, for doing that. They're also building and making new friends, right, in other sports.
Yeah, and it's just,
otherwise.
For sure, yeah. It's just we try to give them that little, because they're from all over the province, right? So depending on where they're from, they might not even be exposed to that sport. So they might not be offered or whatever. So it just gives them that option.
All right, next I wanted to grab a little quote from the full documentary to chat about here. So in that full version, we have a quote from the NFL player JJ Watt, and it says, if someone encourages your child to specialize in a single sport, that person generally does not have your child's best interest in mind. I would like to know our thoughts on that particular quote, and kind of even some of it could be in the context of, what are our parents up against when someone comes to their door with an opportunity for their kiddo?
Yeah, I can start, I guess, with that. I think the question here could be, what is it the coach has in mind for his or her future versus the athlete's future? And this may sound condemning or attacking, but it isn't. There's far more good coaches who are there for the right reason. So I don't want to broad stroke just comment on all coaches, but like in most cases, it's the bad ones that we get the rap on. So a couple of things come to mind, Faye. I would think these coaches who say, stay with me only versus go over there, a couple of things come to mind. It could be personal prestige for the coach. So, and they may see that child as the vehicle to get them to their own professional or personal prestige. So you got a star hockey player, may have interest in another sport, but that if he goes the other sport, he or she goes the other sport, they may not come back. So that reduces the likelihood of my getting, to the next level of my CV or resume padding or whatever you want to call it. Another one comes to mind is networking and the power of the coach, in their personal, professional life. They can associate success at the arena, perhaps with success for them personally. Another one is climbing the sports ladder. So wins and trophies and accolades. It doesn't help to build your resume, as I mentioned, to get to that next level of coaching or perhaps a regional or a provincial or a national position. So you're thinking of your own ladder here. And then another factor would be the control factor. We know that there are some people who are in sport because they like that. I selected the team. I select when we're going to practice. I select who gets the ice time. I select who's on the PP or the PK. I select what tournaments we go to. So there's a little bit of a control issue there with some people. And then I would say lastly, and I don't think hockey's any dissimilar from others, is what I call payback receipts. So you become part of someone's early sport experience. They go on to play in the WHL, then the National League. And guess what? Your association then goes with that success. So, I coached him when I was in PUE, or perhaps, I was on the team when he made the U17 team. And so I guess a whole host of different reasons, Faye. Those are a couple that come to mind. But it really should be, that kid-centric, child-centric, as opposed to, what are the reasons, altruistic, I suppose, for the coach being there, as opposed to why is the child, or in the case of hockey, the children being there. Those are a couple of things that come to mind for me, Faye.
Joel or Matt, anything to add on that?
No, nothing for me. Mark kind of hit all the points there, so.
Thing.
A lot of what we're seeing. Okay, and kind of segueing from that too, I wonder about, there's goodness to all this too. There's goodness to and richness of experience of a player being part of a team and staying with that team for a long haul and going back to coaches that they know and trust. How do we find that balance? How do we honor that, the good side of hanging your hat on hockey and having a hockey identity, with adding a little more richness to it, or helping build perspective for young people?
Well, I can think, oftentimes we talk about hockey culture. I like that word. I'm a fan of that word. Culture means different things to different people. I understand that. But to me, culture is sort of the sum of our values, norms, beliefs, and behaviors. So that's our hockey culture. So what's the hockey norms, values, beliefs, and behaviors? And I think you will find that it's not that dissimilar from other team sports. When children can learn about the importance of being on a team, so for example, punctuality, coming to practice on time, coming to games on time, being prepared. Is your equipment ready? Are your skates sharp? Is your stick taped? The treatment of your equipment. Are you taking good care of it? Are you putting guards on your skates? Are you just throwing it away and you got a $250 helmet there? Do you have your protection on top of it? What about if the paint gets chipped? There's all kinds of things there. Acceptable verbal and body language. That pans all sports. There are certain do's and certain don'ts. Placing skill challenges and growth over things like routine and results. And I think any coach, any progressive coach, wants their athlete to be innovative, wants them to be creative, wants them to do things differently. There's a statistic, I may have heard this from Eric, that I think it was Eric, yeah, and I may have said it earlier, that Wayne Gretzky was such a prolific goal scorer because he shot when the goalies weren't expecting a shot to come. He also scored a lot of goals when he was considered to be out of position. So we always talk about, you're out of position. This is where you score. Well, tell Wayne Gretzky that. So I think there's a few things that come to mind. So playing through adversity and fatigue, opponents that are perhaps a little too aggressive, officials that are missing some calls, occasional setbacks, injuries. I think they're present in all sports, Faye. And I think if we, particular team sports, there's going to be times you're on the starting lineup. There's going to be times you're on the fourth line. You may be asked to play offense on this shift and defense on the next shift. And I think, those are all key components of a sports culture. That's, as teenagers say, that's how we hang, that's how we roll. That's just what we do in sport. And I think that you will find them. And I think that soccer and baseball and basketball players will say the same thing when hockey players come to them. They come back. If those things are foundational across all sports, doesn't all sport win? So I think culture plays a big part in just about any amateur sport. I don't think they'll lose their culture by leaving hockey at a young age or by leaving hockey for 3 or 4 months of the year.
I think that's quite right. And what comes to mind for me as well is we can really lean on our leadership and our coaches who can be the ones to really push those athletes out the door at the end of the season and say, go forth into your summer and swim and play and do your other sports. And I look forward to seeing you next season, but not necessarily, like just kind of give them that permission they might be seeking as a young person when they won't give themselves that permission. So we have a lot of good coaches doing that, I know.
Yes, you're right. And I want to say that if I didn't already, there's a lot of tremendous, great people involved in amateur sport, and I'm certain hockey in Saskatchewan that are there for the right reason. It's just, how do we go from something that's good to better and better to best? And the suggestion is, let's consider this model. That's all. It isn't to point fingers at anyone because these are all volunteers and man, they're needed. It's just collectively, how can we raise the performance bar, not just in results, but how we raise performance bar in terms of physical, mental, and emotional stability of children.
So true. Now, I'm curious from the group here that's joined us today. Thank you for your time. I'd love to hear questions that you have from our live studio audience. You can just unmute and ask or put it in the chat. All right, well, I'll take that as a lot of information to absorb, and I'll simply share my appreciation to you, Mark, for sharing this information and your vision with Give and Go Sport Education. I think there's a lot of good things ahead that we would love to be, included on as you carry forward with your other initiatives. I will work to, and I can't promise, but I'm going to work to make the full documentary available to those of you who joined us today. So I have in mind who joined us here, and I could follow up with you on that. But do share some of this information with your associations, your teams, other parents, and we'll keep this conversation going. Like I said, it's nice to take a moment of reflection to think about how we can, as you say, Mark, take something great, make it better. So thank you to you, Mark, for your time spent with Hockey Saskatchewan today. And thank you all for joining us.
It's a great opportunity for us to be able to distribute this messaging. And whether you buy the documentary or not, I think what's important here is just the openness, right? That just good parenting, good coaching, good sport administration. Be open to what's out there and what's working, and not necessarily that you have to, adapt it all, but just be open to some little marginal shifts here and there, which does keep the child front and center in all sporting activity. And thank you, Faye, for inviting me too.
It's our pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Enjoy the rest of your day.